Good evening.
Good evening.
Now, last night we took up 3 words: as, is, am. And we saw that there is not God and you, there is God expressed as you. That is, there is not glass and a tumbler, there is glass formed as a tumbler. There is not a mahogany and a table, there is mahogany formed as a table. Therefore, the qualities of the mahogany constitute the qualities of the table. The qualities of the glass constitute the qualities of the tumbler. And so we have that word as always before us, so that when we look at ourselves, think of ourselves or others, whether in the human, animal, vegetable kingdoms, always that word as must come to light. There is no such thing as anything separate and apart from God. There is no such thing as anything outside the realm of God. Everything that exists, everything that is actually God manifest, God expressed, God realized. This must necessarily be so if there is a God at all, because the nature of God is infinity. You can't conceive of a finite God. You can't conceive of a God that is less than all, or it wouldn't be God. Therefore, the only way you can use the word God is in a sense of infinite being. Therefore, for God to be infinite being, all that exists must exist as forms of that infinity. Therefore, bearing the qualities, character, and nature of the infinite. Then whatever God is, all individual being must be. Whatever God is, all form must manifest. Now, that's your as, but that also is your is, because all of this that we have declared is truth, and that means it is truth now. And that means that it is truth unto eternity. That means it is truth since before Abraham was. Now, think of this, that from everlasting to everlasting, God is your being. God is your mind, your life, your soul, your spirit. God constitutes your individuality. God is the very substance of your form, of your body, of all that is real and true about you. So we have as and we have is. And the word am comes in when we apply it to myself. Then I say, I am. All that God is, I am. Where God is, I am. What God is, I am. But, and here comes that terrible, terrible word, but. But, I have pain. There's a war. There is injustice. The world is cracking up. There are earthquakes, floods, famine, disaster. Now, how can that be? How can that be after what we have just learned about God as, and God is, and I am? How then can these things be? Where would there be room in the whole of this world for a single error if our basic premise were true? if it is true that God is infinite and beside God there is nothing else, where then is there an error? Where would there be room for it in the infinity of God? And of course the answer is that there could be none and there is none. But that doesn't explain sin, disease, injustice, poverty, starvation, famine. No. And in order to explain it, the Bible gives us 2 chapters of Genesis. 2 chapters of creation, in other words. And in that first one, it tells all about this great universe of as, is, and am. In that first chapter of Genesis, you have light before you even have sun in the sky. You have crops in the ground before there's a single seed planted. You have man on earth before there's a marriage. In other words, what you behold in the first chapter of Genesis is the immaculate God manifesting its own being as Adam, as the first Adam, the original you and me in all of our pristine purity. That whole first chapter of Genesis describes God, you might say, revealing himself as light, as food, as man, as law, as eternality. You have the immaculate conception, God creating out of himself, God expressing itself as form, the one infinite God manifesting itself in billions of forms out of its own inner being. And that's the true creation. Now, there is no use of asking how come the second chapter of Genesis, because there is no literature on the face of the globe, and there are no mystics who have been able to explain how, in view of this marvelous creation, that right alongside of it grows a second creation, which is so unstable to begin with that it doesn't even know how to create. Adam wants a mate, and he takes a rib out of himself, but evidently he wants to create again, and he's not satisfied with the first kind of creation, so he sets up a second kind of creation, the man and woman creation, out of which comes the child. Well, you know, God doesn't make mistakes like that. God doesn't do second guessing. God doesn't try 2 kinds of operation to bring about the same result. God knows. And so we have then this false creation set forth in the second chapter of Genesis, and as we have come to understand it, it is a creation of the human mind. Don't ask where the human mind came from. That no one seems able to answer. The fact is that in spite of as, is, and am, that we have a human mind which can get us into a lot of trouble, and does. In spite of all the great truth there is in the world, in spite of the fact that it has been demonstrated over and over again that love actually sets up a world of harmony and peace without dissension, yet we seem to have a mind that will enable us to love if we want and hate if we want. Although it is definitely proven in the spiritual life of man and woman, that the moment they become a giving person, a sharing person, a cooperative person, that nothing but harmony and good follows all the days, and yet man still has a mind that makes him decide, well, I won't be one of those givers, I'll be a taker. And he proceeds to do it, and suffers, and sees other people not suffering but doesn't believe it. How is it possible that we can have a mind that knows the horrors of alcohol, and yet we could start taking that alcohol and put ourselves in its grasp? Isn't that strange? We know better, and yet people every day in the week are just starting on the alcoholic path. Some are starting on the path of drugging themselves. Even some doctors who have witnessed the horrors of drugging are themselves victims of drugs. Why? Why? They know better. Because there seems to be this capacity for self-thought, selfish thought, I, me, and mine thought. And in that, we have lost our original truth. And so in our message of the infinite way, we call this a sense of separation from God. And we say that wherever there is a sense of separation from God, that instead of living and moving and having our being in God consciousness, we live and move and have our being in our own selfish interest, which in the end proves to be disastrous to us. Now, in the Bible, you have a story called, and it's only an allegorical story, called the Fall of Adam, which supposedly explains that we developed this sense of separateness from God. That is, we ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and thereby became aware of an identity which we called ourselves, and we no longer plugged in to the one big true identity, the source of all good. And so we set up a fellow called Joel or Adam and said, oh, now I must earn my own living. Oh, now I must go out and find satisfaction. Now I must go out and acquire territory. And you see, that's a false sense of I, which in itself creates a sense of separation from the one real I, in which we would have to do none of those things. All we would have to do is let God's goodness flow through our experience. Now, later we have in Scripture another allegory which is supposed to tell us the same story in a different way. And that is the story of the prodigal son. Now, the prodigal son is the son of this rich king. We have two qualities there that you must remember. King, meaning royalty or supreme, and rich, meaning having all. So here we have a young man who is already joint heir to the highest and has all, because all that his father has is his, even the title. And yet he isn't satisfied, because he wants to set up a sense of I-ness. So he leaves his father's house, and he has the word I, and now he goes out and begins to spend it and use it and try to acquire, to add to it. In other words, earn his living by the sweat of his brow. And the struggle, though, is against him. He comes up against what everybody does, time, which always works to deplete. And so he comes to a place where he has nothing left and has to eat with the swine. At this lowest state of his development, he remembers that he's the son of the Most High King, heir to all those riches, and that even the servants in his father's house is better off than he is. And so he starts the way back home. Now we are told that we are that prodigal son, that we were complete human beings living on this sense of I, trying to get along as best I could, using whatever cleverness I could develop, or education, or physical powers, or mental powers of my own. And all of us were doing that same thing and not doing too well. And so we either hit up against sin or sickness or lack or unhappy relationships, so that we realized, I'm not doing too well. I'm not doing too well on my own. Is there something greater than myself? Is there something that I can turn to that will lift me out of this, because I don't know how to? The doctors can't get me well, or the ministers can't pray me pure, or I can't get my feet or hands onto another fortune. And is there a power other than my own ingenuity or my own self which will raise me up again into where I belong? And it is in that state of the prodigal's depth that we have been divinely guided to some metaphysical teaching. In some cases it was a spiritual one, sometimes mental, sometimes combination of the mental and the spiritual. But in any event, God led us to that which was nearest at hand, and we immediately recognized, oh yes, there is a way to climb back. It may have been the way of Christian Science or Unity or New Thought or Truth or Yoga. It may have been any of these paths that are outside the ordinary orthodox, because we had already discovered that that wouldn't do it. And so we turned to the one to which we were first led, and we began our upward climb. Sometimes we were on it a short time and found that it wasn't the full answer, and we searched around and were led to another one. Other times we found a temporary answer and were on it a longer time, and then realized we'd come to the end of the rope and must go further. And so it's always going to be. We are always going to keep our aspiration so high that no matter where we are at this moment, we are not going to be satisfied until we are inside that last chapter of the infinite way, where we say, I am home in thee. We won't say, I am home in Christian Science or Unity or the infinite way. We will say, I am home in thee. Now that's our goal. The goal is achieved through conscious union with God. But before I come to that now, let me tell you, all of these discords that we face, past, present, or some of those that are still to come, will have to be dealt with, will have to be met, will have to be overcome. And we don't overcome them through a blind faith by saying, oh, let God do it. That's been tried by hundreds of millions and hasn't worked. Once in a while, there is a person who rises so high in ecstatic faith that they really get outside themselves into God and do witness a miracle. The figures show that out of 100,000 people, every 100,000 people who go to Lourdes, that 15 have complete and permanent healings. And you can be assured that those 15, when they go there with such hope, such faith, such ecstasy, such love of God, that finally they find themselves outside their own being, and they achieve a measure of God realized. That's a very small proportion, and it wouldn't do for us to sit around hoping to be one of the 15 out of 100,000. Now, these problems that exist in our experience are not actually problems that exist in the world. They exist in our mind. They do not exist outside anywhere. They don't exist in this room. If you search this room from corner to corner, you wouldn't find a problem in this whole room. But if we searched your mind and mine, we'd find lots of problems. Because that's where they thrive. That's where they exist. In your mind and in my mind. In your belief and in my belief. In your wrong concept of the world, in my wrong concept of the world. It's all in the false concept that we entertain of the world. Now, I don't mean that it isn't perfectly real and painful and destructive to you and me. It is, whether it's inside the mind or out. But the fact that it doesn't exist as a reality with a law is what enables us to surmount it, to survive it, to overcome it, and to get back into that original pure state of consciousness in which there are no discords. And it is for this reason that we have a spiritual practice. The human world knows nothing of this, and therefore the human world walks around more or less hopelessly. That is why in every place where there are radios or televisions, it makes no difference how expensive they are. Everybody manages to get a hold of one. They might not be able to get a hold of 57 shillings for a good book, but they'll get a hold of 50 pounds for a television set. And why? Because the television set will drown their troubles. It will give them an escape. There was an article in your paper here this morning about these new drugs that are being sold over here, which relieve you of your worry. Now, they're selling in the United States by the billions. Everybody takes pills every day to stop their worries. And they do stop worrying for a few hours. They do, they're relieved. It doesn't change their problem, because no, they have to wake up later and face the problem and get worried again. But then there's a pill tomorrow. And if they just take enough, they'll go to sleep forever, and they won't have to wake up to their problem. Or maybe someday they will accept Aldous Huxley's suggestion of having the great multi-billion-dollar corporations finance a drug which will enable each of us to be asleep 8 hours a day in addition to our night sleep, so that we'll have 8 free hours of worry. 8 hours in which we'll be so happy. Of course, when the 8 hours up, like Cinderella, we have to go home and lose our glass slipper and go back to rags. But for those 8 hours, we can be Cinderella. Well, I don't think there's anyone in this room would be satisfied with that. We have gone a step further than wanting an escape. We have gone a step further than wanting just to push the troubles in back of our mind and get rid of them for a few hours, or even to take a vacation for a couple of weeks and then come back and face them. I think all of us have come to the point where if we have problems, we'd rather bring them right out tonight, sit up all night if necessary, and face them and see if we can't meet them and overcome them. All right? Now then, in the practice of the infinite way, you will find 2 parts to the teaching. Well, there are 2 parts which we call the letter of truth and then the consciousness of truth, but I meant 2 parts to the letter of truth. And one is the nature of reality, which includes knowing the nature of God and the nature of prayer. And that would be your as, is, and am, would all come into knowing the nature of God and the nature of prayer, treatment. But then we have another part, and a part which is very, very unpopular with most of our students for a long, long time. I would say that most of our students for 2 or 3 years are always convinced that if they were Joel Goldsmitg, they'd know how to improve this teaching, and they would leave out this part called the nature of error. Oh, I know most of them would surely improve on it and leave that out, because everybody knows that error isn't real. So why do we have to bother with the nature of error? But I haven't been able to accept their view on this because of my own 27 years experience. As a matter of fact, one time I was invited to give a class in a truth center, and the leader said, now, of course, we've heard here how you devote part of the class to the nature of error. And so I'd like to tell you, you won't have to do that here, because our students all know about that. They know that error isn't real. And I said, then why are they students and why are they here? If they've discovered that, they have no problems. Now, what do they want this for? Oh, no, they all have problems. But you just said that they know the nature of error, and it's nothing. Yes. Well, if it's nothing, what are they here for? To get rid of nothing? No, I'm sure they're here to get rid of something. And that something is error in one form or another. And so I have never left out those chapters of the book called The Nature of Error, nor have I ever neglected it in this work. And this is the reason. Now mark this well, because this is going to be a very, very important point in your life if you catch it. If you don't, you're going to have to go through class another time and start all over again. In every teaching on the face of the globe, there are two powers, excluding, of course, the infinite way. The infinite way has one power. In all religions, you have a God, a good, usually represented by God, and you have evil, usually represented by Satan or devil. In philosophy, you have a power of good with a capital G, and you have evil with a capital E. In metaphysics, you have the immortal, which is the good, and you have the mortal, which is the evil. And now in all of these, the idea is that God is really superior to the evil. The good is superior to the evil, to the error, if you can find out how to go about it. In other words, it is definitely taught that God is the greater power, but no one has yet found how to get God to overcome the evil, and that's why the evil still exists in the world. But the object of religion is to find a way to reach God so that our evils can be overcome. And that doesn't happen in the infinite way. In the infinite way, you have one power, and that's God, and you never use it, and you don't have to use it. There's no need to use it. There's nothing to use it about or over. That which appears to us as evil is recognized as a picture, a suggestion, a hypnotic influence, but not a thing or a person, not a cause, and has no law. It exists as a mental image in your thought. Very much like looking at the car tracks in the distance and seeing them come together and then realizing, well, we don't have to push them apart because in reality they don't come together. They only appear to. Now that's intelligence overcoming an erroneous appearance. That's knowledge overcoming an erroneous appearance, but not separating car tracks because they weren't together. In the same way, you see a sky sitting on top of a mountain. And you want to go across that mountain, but you can't. Because how are you going to get past that sky sitting up there? No. Intelligence says to you, aha, that's an illusion. That's a false picture. That's an appearance, but it is not a reality, because the sky is up where the sky belongs and the mountains where the mountains belong, and in spite of all appearances, I'm going up and over the mountain. Now there again is not one power overcoming another. You haven't pushed the sky off the mountain. It wasn't there. It was merely your knowledge, your intelligence telling you the truth. Do you follow that? You didn't do anything to push tracks apart. You didn't do anything to raise the sky off the mountain or the horizon on the water. Do you remember how many centuries that ships couldn't go further than a few miles from land? Because they couldn't find anybody to push that horizon back. If only they could have found a God who would have shoved that horizon back. But God wouldn't do it for them. Why? There wasn't any horizon there. That was a mental image and thought, and it finally took a Christopher Columbus to demonstrate that. Others knew it, but they tried to tell it to the church. And that's always a bad business, as they found out. But evidently, Christopher Columbus decided that the best way, he believed, I guess, in the Chinese teaching, one picture's better than 10,000 words. I'll just make one trip across that horizon and that'll end it. And it did end it for the world. It ended him. He ended up in prison, too, for proving it. But the point is this: he did prove that you do not need a power to push the horizon off the ocean. He did prove that the horizon isn't there. So it is. If you understand what I am saying to you tonight, you will not have to use a god to get rid of your sins or your diseases or your lacks. You will acknowledge the fact that in spite of appearances, there aren't any there. You may know a man who acts like a devil, but it's up to you to realize, I'm being deceived by appearances. God made man in his own image and likeness, and man is pure and upright. You may know somebody who's dying and has every appearance of it, but you will have to say, I don't need a God to heal this person. I know now that this whole thing, this whole appearance is an illusion. And then you'll find what it is that is meant in the New Wisdoms, where it says that you're only really and truly showing spirituality when you have no desires, when you have nothing left to pray for. Now, you wouldn't pray to have those cart tracks pushed apart. You wouldn't pray to have the sky removed from the mountain. You won't pray to have the horizon removed. And if you'll go to your public library tomorrow and check up on how many fish are in the sea and birds in the air and how many cattle are on 1,000 hills and how many crops are in the ground, you won't pray for supply anymore. You'll just know that God is flooding this universe so tremendously with supply that you don't have to pray to God. You may have to do something else. You may have to find some other way of making your contact with it, but it won't be to pray to God for supply, because you will know with one visit to your library there's enough supply in this world of everything there is in the world. Platinum, gold, uranium, oil. There isn't a thing missing. God didn't overlook a bit. Now, the nature then of error is that you're not dealing with a condition that has to be changed, improved, healed, or removed. You are dealing with an appearance that you must see through. Now, with your human eyes, you can't see through the horizon on the ocean, can you? That always stays there as a horizon. With your eyes, you can't see through the sky sitting on the mountain. That appearance is there. So you have to have a higher intelligence than your eyesight if you are ever to overcome that ignorance. Is that right? We call that higher power, an intelligence of that which is. All right. There is a faculty which you possess but which you've used very little. It's a spiritual faculty. And with that faculty, you can look at any appearance and say, isn't it wonderful? It isn't true. It hasn't a law. It hasn't a cause. It doesn't come within the realm of God's creating. Therefore, I need not fear it. And Scripture confirms that when it says, I shall not fear what mortal man can do to me. It also tells you don't go to the other extreme and put your faith in princes. Keep your faith not on God as going to do something, but on God as already having established this earth in its spiritual perfection. Do you see that? As is and am. As is and am. Have faith, not that God will do something for you an hour from now or tomorrow. Don't have faith that God's going to be good to you. Have faith that since before Abraham was, God's kingdom has been established on earth, and perfection is. Now, first, you may only have your intellect to make that statement with. But if you persist in it, You will develop this inner spiritual faculty which will enable you to look through appearances and behold the man and the world of God's creation. Do you see that? Now, if you don't understand the nature of error, sure as fate, you're going to go out looking for a God to do something for you tomorrow. And you're not going to find it because all the religious world is out on that same search, and they're not finding it. Everybody, whether they are Hebrews or Christians, whether they are Muslims or Hindus, they're all out looking for a God that's going to do something for them, and they're not finding it. And they're not going to find it either. Because all that God did, he did in the beginning. That which is, always has been, that which has been, always will be. Why? Because God is. Good is. Harmony is. Spirit is. Reality is. Now, to be able to live in that state of is means that you won't try to reach God for any purpose but one. And I don't think there's anything nicer than an unfoldment that came to me during a class one time in connection with this, when I said that if your mother were living at the other end of the world and you had a natural desire to go and be with your mother, do you think it would be for some purpose or to get something, or just for the joy of communing and being with her? And that's the answer, isn't it? Who wants to go to their mother to get something? Who wants to go to their mother for some purpose? All we want to do is go to our mother for the sake of sitting with her, talking with her, enjoying her, communing with her. Everybody wants that and nothing else. And that's what we want to go to God for. We want nothing of God but the joy of communion. We want nothing of God but the joy of conscious union, oneness, peace and joy. Sitting out somewhere on a hill with God. Not asking for favors, just saying, let me sit here and just abide in thy grace, abide in thy presence. That is why we want to meditate. That is why we want to commune or pray. Not to get something because you can't get it. You cannot get it. You are already heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ in God. And all the heavenly riches are already yours. And the world is making its mistake by looking to God for something, and God hasn't it to give because God isn't withholding it. If God were withholding it, then you might get up there and tease him a little bit, coax and plead and beg and bribe and maybe even tithe with him, and have him loosen up his strings. But God is not withholding anything, and therefore God can't give you anything. Please remember that. God isn't withholding. No more than the sunshine is, the sun is withholding warmth or light. No more than water is withholding wetness. No more than the ground is withholding crops. No. Anything that comes under God's grace is not withholding. I don't care how many fish you take out of the sea, next season there'll be more there. It don't make a difference how many birds you shoot out of the air, next year there'll be more there. Always there'll be more and more and more, because God does not withhold. But on the other hand, God doesn't give. God just is. God is ising all the time. God is expressing all the time. God is unfolding and disclosing and revealing itself all the time. Not beginning an hour from now. Not after you pray. Not after you commune. Not after anything. But in the beginning, since before Abraham was. That's why Jesus didn't have to hurry to Lazarus. He just waited 3 or 4 days before he got over there to raise him. Because he knew that nothing could happen to Lazarus today that hadn't happened yesterday. Nothing could happen yesterday that won't happen tomorrow, because as far as Jesus was concerned, God is. And when he got before Lazarus' tomb, that's exactly what he said. I don't have to pray, Father, but for the sake of these ignorant people, I'll say something. Don't you see that if you live in the tabernacle of God, if you live in the consciousness of God, if you are willing to give up your desires, your hopes, your anxieties, and your fears, and just say, oh, let me rest, let me sit at the feet of God. Just let me rest as a child with its parent, wanting nothing, desiring nothing, really trusting that the allness of God is forever being expressed, you will soon find such a state of peace and relaxation as will surprise you, and it will not be long until that flow will begin to come in your direction. It may take a day, a week, a month, but you will find that as you relax in it and stop looking to God for something, stop believing that God's withholding something, and that in some miraculous way you can start the flow going. You can't do it. You can't influence God. You just can't do it. God isn't to be influenced by us. God is always about its own business. So leave God alone and let God do it. But always seek to be in the companionship of God. Always seek. It is like, I've repeated this so often now, acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace, or acknowledge him in all thy ways, or thou wilt keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. Just rest and abide in the assurance. Well, now just look. How many times in your life you've watched 24 hours go by each day? And sure than fate, the sun came up, and the sun went down, and the rain came, and the rain stopped, and the snow came, and the snow stopped, and the trees were barren, and the trees were full. Now what did you have to do with all that? Nothing but be a beholder. Nothing but be a beholder. God had it all in God's own hand. So it is. The nature of error is important because if you understand it, you will stop trying to worry God. You will stop trying to use God as a power over your discordant conditions, and you will rest more in the assurance that God is an infinity, and that all these errors of the world are a dream substance. Awake, thou that sleepest, and Christ will give thee light. Do you see that? You'll just realize why all of this horrid human picture is a mental image and thought which disappears the moment we relax our fears, our doubts, our hates, our selfishness, our sense of getting instead of sharing that which flows from within our own being. Now, those are the two parts of the letter of truth, as, is, and am, and then the nature of error, so that you are not tempted to use God as a power over some form of evil. Is that clear? Now, when you've got that, and if you persist in it, you will develop the spiritual consciousness, this inner faculty, which enables you without effort to really see with inner vision. And don't think you don't need it, because the Master spoke of those poor people who had eyes but didn't see and had ears but didn't hear. He meant they had outer eyes but they had no inner vision. They heard outwardly with their ears. They probably also were listening to their form of television in those days and had no time for this spiritual vision. Now, I don't mean that I have anything against the right use of television or any other human thing. Don't ever misunderstand what I'm saying. I've learned Peter's lesson, not to call anything filthy that God hath made. And so our television and our radios and our movies and music, everything that God has given, and God has given us those things, are good. Man sometimes perverts the use of them and makes them evil. But in and of themselves they're good, and in and of themselves one of these days they're going to be the great blessings to lift us up into this consciousness, because they are going to be the means through which these lessons are given to the world. All right. Now then, understanding that all that God is, I am, understanding that there's no me separate and apart from God, therefore I embody all that God is, that enables me to say, what of this error? Well, then if this first part is true, the second part can't be true. And then rest and rest and rest in that realization. Now, that is the principle of the infinite way. Oneness and one power. But the next point that we come to is the specific application And so we have a question here. Well, let's first, before we come to that, let's take this other question and get it out of the way, and then we'll come back to the main one. This question is, explain this point in prayer. You say that we must not ask for anything except that the Spirit of the Lord may come upon us. Why did the Lord teach us the Lord's Prayer? Well, for that reason. For that reason, so that you'd never ask for anything. Because he says so definitely you mustn't ask for anything. He says in that prayer, give us this day our daily bread. But who in this room believes that he meant baker's bread after saying that I am the bread of life? What is bread? What was the bread he was talking about? Certainly he didn't mean baker's bread when he talked about himself as bread. I am the bread of life. Do you remember how many times he told us not to labor for the meat which perisheth? Then why should he say pray for it if it perisheth? And he tells you not to labor for it. Certainly if you're not going to labor for it, why should you pray for it? So he didn't say that you should pray for bread or meat or wine or water. When he said, give us this day our daily bread, now do you know what he meant? He meant what he said. The staff of life, the substance of life, which is truth. I am the bread of life, but he said, I am truth. Therefore, truth is the bread of life. Truth is bread. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day an understanding heart. Give us this day the staff of life, spiritual understanding. Give us an ear that we can hear with, an eye that we can see with. Give us perception. Give us substance, the substance of life. Don't you remember the great passage which appears in two of the Gospels, Matthew and Luke? Take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, or wherewithal ye shall be clothed. Now, isn't that clear enough that he told you not to pray for things? And so when he says, give us this day our daily bread, certainly he's meaning give us understanding. Give us the meat that perisheth not. Give us the wine of inspiration. Give us the water that springs up into life eternal. There's nothing material about that. And then where does he go on from there? Lead us not into temptation? Why, certainly. As human beings, is there a single one of us that has ever avoided temptation? It may not be some may not have been tempted to sin in the ways of the world, but there isn't a person, certainly in this room, who hasn't been tempted to sin in the way of unlovingness, injustice, envy, hate, malice, jealousy, some form of error, some form of sin, criticism, judgment, condemnation, throwing the first stone. Who hasn't sinned or been tempted to sin? Maybe some who've never indulged, but the Master himself was tempted. Don't we have the story in the Bible of his 3 temptations in the wilderness? He was an hungered, and he was tempted to turn stones into bread. He was tempted to go out after fame. You never dreamed, did you, that the Master, Christ Jesus, was really tempted to go out after fame? But he was. He was in a position where he could have become the most famous man of the Holy Lands. And he was tempted with it. And he tells you he was tempted with it, and then he tells you how he met it. Pondered it, and then finally turned on it and said, get thee behind me, Satan. But it was a temptation facing him right face to face. Now then, everyone's tempted. Everyone has to be tempted. Evil temper, some unkindness, some bigotry, some bias. Everyone's tempted. And so it becomes necessary that we pray every day. Oh, lead me not into temptation. You may not be praying to a God to do anything, but you're praying to that inner self of you to stay on the straight and narrow path. And so it is. You will find that you can pray to God for anything you like as long as you don't pray for anything material. Pray for spiritual unfoldment. Pray for spiritual realization. Pray for the Spirit of Christ to be upon you. Pray that for forgiveness from those temptations that we may have succumbed to. Anything of a spiritual nature, but don't pray for things. And so it is all the way through the Master's teaching Father, I know that thou hearest me always. Father, I pray not that thou take them out of the world, but leave them in the world, but let them be separate. So forth and so on. Now let us come back here. Please explain how one deals with specific treatments. Now, here we have a broad principle. Now we've spent 3 nights on this principle. A very broad principle. But now somebody says, I am sick, very sick and in pain. So now we have to bring our principle right down to a specific case, to a specific application, because now just dealing in generalities isn't a treatment, isn't the answer to the problem. And so now we come to an individual who has said to another individual, I am sick, I am in pain, do something about it, help me. Now you have to take your principle and bring it right down to concrete realization. And to begin with, you can do it in this wise. We will say now that you are seated comfortably somewhere away from the rest of the family. You've had this call for help, and now you drop that person and their disease or claim. You drop that out of your thought. And the first word that must come into your thought is God. You never are going to go anywhere in this work if you start your treatment with any other word than God. God. Now remember, too, that this is not a formula that I'm giving you. Please remember that repeating these words won't heal anybody. Your treatment has to be somewhat spontaneous, although it must abide in the mold of the form. All right, God. Wait a minute. That was a person who asked for help, but God is infinite being. Oh, God then must be the only person. God appears as this person, so, then only the qualities of God are present. Only the quantity of God is present. Only the laws of God are present. Only the life of God is present. The allness of God is present. The purity of God is present. Why? The infinite nature of God's pure being is individually expressed as this individual. There we are with that is. And there we are with that am. And there we are with that as. All that God is, this individual is, because there is no this individual. There is only God appearing as this individual. And all that God is, this individual is. Am, is, as. Do you see that? You are applying that specifically. God is the life of individual being. God is the purity of individual being. God is the soul of individual being. God is the only law and the only lawgiver. But wait a minute. There claims to be a law of matter here, a law of disease, a law of germs, a law of infection, a law of contagion, or a law of heredity. But since God is infinite and there can only be one law and it's spiritual, then what is there to material law or medical law or, nothing but illusion. No substance, no law. It's a belief. It's a belief, but we aren't believers of it. Therefore it can't affect us. Now the world may well die from believing in the power of infection and contagion, but it will not come nigh your dwelling place if you do not accept the belief of infection or contagion as having power. Do you see that? It isn't only that infection and contagion have no power, but the universal belief in them have no power. You have to nullify even the material law and the mental law behind it. Follow that? Isn't as easy as when we were dealing just with the principle. Now we are applying that principle to a specific case. Or supposing we have a case where we have, instead of a sick person, we have a bad person. There we are again. We start with God. Oh, but God being infinite, God's nature is the only nature of this person. Therefore, there are no qualities of good or evil. There are only the qualities of God, spirit, life, truth. Now, in almost every case that comes to you, you will find some law at work. It'll be a law of human nature, or a law of matter, or a law of heredity, or a law of infection or contagion, or a law of decomposition, or a law of breakage. There's always some kind of a law, and therefore you have to handle that and realize, yes, but none of these are laws. There is only one law. There isn't even a law of convalescence. There can only be one law, and that is the law which is God, and that's spirit, omnipresent, eternal, here and now, as is, am. Do you see that? Or you may have the case of life. It may be somebody dying or very sick, and so you start with God, but God is life. How many lives are there? Well, if God is infinite, there's only one life. And the life of God is the life of individual being. How old is it? 40 billion years old. And yet it has no old age, because God is just as young today as when it was conceived. And so you see, we have no age to deal with, because we have not the life of man. We have the life of God to deal with, which is the life of man. And there's no other way to absolutely maintain the life and vitality and strength and health of your body than to know that you have no life, health, or strength that only God has. But all that God has is because there's only one. Do you see that? There's no other way except to give up your own life and acknowledge that the only life there is God, and it's not subject to matter, nor is it subject to material beliefs. It's not subject to material conditions or mental conditions. It's subject only to itself, which is God itself, the law and the life itself. Well, it may be an accident, and so you've got to sit down with the accident. Now, if God is the intelligence of the universe, could there be an accident? No. Then this that has appeared to be an accident is without law. Without cause and without effect, it exists only as an illusory picture and thought. Do you see that? Thereby you wipe out the accident and the effects of the accident and the beliefs about the accident. Oh yes, never doubt this. We never neglect anyone who asks for help, nor do we treat it lightly, nor joke about it, nor believe that just by saying "Folly Ral" that something's going to happen. There has to be a specific and conscious realization of the truth, and sometimes it has to be persisted in for long periods. Right now, I have a group of 5 students, and we are taking up these cases which have heretofore been called incurable by materia medica. Whenever a case comes to me, you see, on account of my writings being so spread around the world, and people read them and then say, this must be the greatest healer in the world, we write to him. And so I get mail from all over the world, and as you might know, they're all the cases that nobody else was able to cure. So I get multiple sclerosis and polio and blue babies and yellow babies and everything under the sun that materia medica has called incurable comes to the infinite way doorstep. Now, there was a time when I took a delight in setting aside periods each day for that type of case, and working on them sometimes for years to bring about some semblance of healing. And with some we had fair success, and with some none. But now that I can't do that, traveling the way I do, I can't undertake to take one of those almost impossible from the human standpoint cases. And so we have these 5 students at home, and we work them all out together, and they agree to work on them every single day of the week. So every time one of these cases comes to me, our 5 students takes hold, and every single day of the week they are given 1 and 2 treatments so as to see what can be done with this belief of incurability. And so far I have not too much to report, because we only began a few months ago, and I do know this, though: we are going to solve whatever is possible of solution along that line. Now then, if you have a case like that in your family, where you have one of these conditions that according to medicine is incurable, and where your own experience shows that everything that's been done for it hasn't worked, I only have one solution for you. Accept your responsibility and go to work on that case every single day of the week, and if necessary 2 or 3 times, and see what you can do with it, because eventually you will meet it if you're faithful. If you will treat along these lines, eventually you will meet it if you're faithful. If you will treat along these lines, you will find that you will break through. To what extent you will break through, well, there are so many different circumstances involved that nobody can tell you. I have handled multiple sclerosis, and I have seen it react in several ways. In some cases, I've had absolutely no response. That was very few cases. In most of the cases, I had an immediate cessation of the deterioration and was able to keep the person in good health and active and even able to earn a living, although not bringing out the full and complete healing. And in that, I have never yet had a full and complete healing. Now, so it is. I have had the strangest experience with cataracts. I have had some of the most marvelous healings, absolutely instantaneous. And I have had a few very slow healings, and I've had some with absolutely no response at all, where it was just as if I might just well have been treating a blank wall. So you see, there are some of these claims that we do not yet know all there is to be known about them, and we're working at it. And you'll have to do the same thing. Where you have conditions like that, you'll have to undertake the responsibility, because you can't afford to hire a practitioner to give their life to your family. And some of these cases really take just that. Consecration 2, 3, 4 times a day until you break through some of those cases. Now, I'm speaking from the standpoint of the unusual case. The normal ill, the normal problems that come up are very quickly dealt with if you deal with them correctly. If you are willing to actually sit down and realize this as and is and am, and then take that nature of error and look it right in the face, whatever the claim may be, and say, yes, but what are you? Do you exist out there, or are you an illusion? Do you have a law to support you? Do you have a cause? Do you see that? And then you'll find out that you'll meet most of the cases that come to you very quickly. I have an idea that most of these so-called incurable cases are not really physical at all. They appear outwardly as physical, but they have something to do with soul influence or lack of it, sense of separation from God, probably even in prenatal experience. Not that they're responsible for it. Don't ever criticize or judge anybody, because none of us are responsible for the particular ills that we have. They are something that are beyond our ability to have until we are spiritual students. After we're spiritual students, then it's spiritual wickedness in high places to go and sin some more. The Master tells you, I forgive you, but go and sin no more. The person who has come to a spiritual teaching and then insists on human conduct, they have themselves to blame for the consequences. And that is one reason that this classwork is so sacred to me. Please be assured that I have absolutely no interest in any of the money that's involved in my classwork. Not any interest whatsoever. I can live beautifully without it. So that I am guided only by one motive in my classwork, and that is to bring students to as high a level of spiritual development as I can. Now, for that reason, I try to not have students go through closed class until they are sufficiently studied in the writings and recordings, so that at least they have a basis, a foundation, so that when they hear me, they're not listening to Greek or Sanskrit. That they understand what I'm talking about. They've met it in the books. They've seen the principles here and there, and they're familiar with it. Then, I don't mind how many closed classes a person goes through while they're on the way, but I would like for everyone not to give consideration to practitioner classes until they've had at the very least 6 months, a year, year and a half, to put this that they learn in the closed class into work, into action, so that they are beginning to get some response to it, beginning to bring out healings. Then, when they begin to bring out healings, then they're ready for practitioner work, which will really put the seal on it. Now, why is this? The reason is that the mere fact that I tell you these things, or the mere fact that you hear them later on tape, isn't going to do you a bit of good. It's only what registers in your consciousness and what you develop through constant practice that's going to do you good. If you can take the lessons that you have received in these 3 nights, and if you could practice these as faithfully as we have a right to expect of you, if you would practice these for the next 6 months or the next year, you would begin to see some fine healing work come through. Then, if you had some fine healing work come through, you would be ready for some of the work of the practitioner class. Then, again, keep on attending closed classes, as many as possible, as many practitioner classes as possible, because you're not learning more, you are having your spiritual consciousness developed. I can't increase your knowledge after the first closed class. You've got all the knowledge in that. You've got the whole letter of truth in this class and in my books. I'll never add any knowledge to you after this, but I will certainly deepen your consciousness if you let me. But I can't do it just by taking you through class after class after class. No, that's just adding a lot of knowledge. You must take the principle that you're given, practice it, the same as if you were studying music. Wouldn't it be terrible if you found a music teacher who would give you a lesson every day of the week without you having practiced what you got the day before? You'd know right well that teacher wanted nothing but your fees. And so it is here. If we were interested in fees, maybe we'd be conscienceless enough to say, well, go to class every day and let's keep on going. But that's not the object of this work. That's not. The only part money plays in this work is the expense that's taken care of with it. No other purpose. The object of this work is developing the spiritual consciousness of the student, because the spiritual consciousness will do healing work. It'll do more than healing work. It'll change the whole consciousness of this world. But not by the knowledge you get in class, but by what you do with the knowledge that you get in class. To what extent you use it in the developing of your consciousness. Now, those who know me in the States, if you could meet them, will tell you. To me, a class is a sacred undertaking, and it's one that I'm very, very fussy about. I have lots of fights about it, because all the people don't agree that I'm right. But it just so happens that I agree that I'm right, and I'm a majority with me. I don't have a board of directors or a board of governors. I don't even have an advisory council. I go to God. God tells me what I want to know, and if I'm mistaken in what he tells me, then I pay the penalty, and afterwards I have to correct it. But this is what I have learned in my life. When I began the healing work, I was getting fine results in healing right from the beginning, but I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why or how. And all you have to do is look at my record, and you will see I spent 16 years finding out before I ever taught one person. Now, that's having patience. But that is because I didn't want to make a mistake. I didn't want the responsibility for, you see, this work is the soul of a person. It isn't their body. If you only kill their body, that would be all right. They get another chance to pick it up and start over. But if you give people wrong spiritual teaching, you're really perverting their soul. You're really putting them off the track, and it may be generations before they get back on again. And a person who undertakes to teach should be awfully certain they're living close to God. because otherwise you're tampering with another person's consciousness, another person's soul, another person's hopes of eternity. And that should not be done lightly, and the proof that I've tried to do that is that for 16 years I never had a class. I just stayed in offices and healed and healed and healed and healed until in my final year I took care of 135 cases per day, 7 days per week, 52 weeks in that entire year. And then I said, well, now I'm at the maximum. I can't take on any more. Now I can stop. And I did stop that amount of practice and permitted the teaching to start. Do you see that? And so it is now. If you look at these manuscripts that have come off the tapes from the beginning, you will find I haven't rubbed out a sentence. I haven't had to backtrack. I haven't had to say, well, I was mistaken about this. Not a sentence has been erased. Nobody has, no teacher, no practitioner, no student has ever been able to say to me, look, you've got a wrong statement in your books. There may be a misprint somewhere, but there are no wrong statements. Why? I waited 16 years before those things came through. Certainly, you can wait 6 months or a year and put these into practice so that you say, aha, I've got the foundation, I've got my teeth into this little bit, now I'm ready for another meal, a deeper meal. Do you see that? Then you'll find that we will have consecrated classes. Then you'll find we have consecrated students. Then you'll find that we can go out in the world and be an example. But you know as well as I do, there's already too much criticism about Christian Scientists and Unity students and New Thought students who aren't living up to what their teaching is, and the teaching gets blamed. Teaching has no right to get blamed. It's the fault of a student who goes through class for a week or a month and gets a degree and then tries to set themselves up as if they really knew something. And nobody knows anything that way. Nobody does. This is a matter of spiritual unfoldment, spiritual development. And so it must be. Now then, remember that every specific claim that presents itself to you has to be met in your consciousness. Every specific claim. Not only when people ask you for help, but if you walk along the street and see an intoxicated person, that is a claim coming to you. If you see a crippled person, if you see a beggar, that is, don't ignore it, don't pass it by. Don't be like those fellows that passed by the man on the road to Jericho and let him lie there. Don't you let him lie there. Physically, yes. Spiritually, no. Lift them right up in your consciousness to the truth of being. We have had this experience now 3 times. Once in Honolulu, where we had a class like this, and we have some girls who have to take a bus to go to their home after the class, and we had had a lesson on this very thing of not passing by. And this night a girl got into a bus, and there was a man in the back, very boisterous and very obscene in his language, and drunk as a lord. And this girl began immediately with the realization that God was manifest as individual being. And as a matter of fact, that Honolulu class, the title of it is The Infinite Nature of Individual Being. And so she started on that, the infinite nature of individual being. Individual being includes all that God is. Individual being has only the qualities of God. And so she began within herself, and finally that man came over and touched her and said, "Thank you for praying for me. I'm all right now." And then we had a Canadian girl of 19, a little ballet dancer, who was going through a class in Seattle, and we had had this very same lesson. And she was accustomed to going down to the coffee shop for a cup of tea before retiring after the class. And she got down there, and at the very opposite end of the room is a man, and again intoxicated and boisterous, noisy. And she began here right with her realization. And this man walked over to her and said, "Miss, will you talk to me about God?" And for 30 minutes he never let her go kept her there talking to him about God. He said, I will never drink another drop. Do you see that? You can't pass by these people in the road who are sick, sinful, dead. Lift them up. Lift them up in your consciousness and realize the infinite nature of God as individual you and me. As. And then realize that that law is operating. Is. Do you see that? And as you do that, if they're at all receptive, they'll get up and walk. They'll feel it. They'll know it. There is an experience that took place in the shop, a tobacconist shop in Canada. A man was in there purchasing, and he fell down dead. And somebody came in off the street, and then they called a doctor, and the man was pronounced dead. But in that city, there is a truth center, and the minister of it is a very, very fine leader, a very fine minister, a very spiritual woman. And that woman was passing by the shop, and seeing the crowd, she walked in. And then she was told that this was a dead man. They were waiting for the ambulance. And she knelt by that man, and he got up and walked away. Yes. Not an infinite way student, a truth student of other teachings, but a woman of sufficient developed spiritual consciousness that she could raise the dead. Do you see that? Now, that is what we have to do, and you don't do that just going through class. You don't do that going through 10 classes. You do that with whatever truth you have, and utilize it, and practice with it, until your consciousness is so developed that you won't see a dead man, or a sick man, or a drunken man, or a beggar. But you will actually see through the appearance to the infinite nature of God appearing as individual being. And so you will have those healings. Now, is that clear? The next question, could you give us the approach to the first steps for children? I wish I could. We are just at the stage now where one of our students is developing the work of teaching students. She has just started to make some tapes, and she will soon begin writing articles. And the reason she is doing it is that, first of all, she is the mother of 3 children, and a very successful mother of 3 very wonderful children. And so her own life experience has equipped her. And she's been a student for many, many years of this work, and is beginning to put it in form for the teaching of children. You see, one thing I've learned, an hour of Sunday school may be very good if you have a good Sunday school teacher, but it's limited in its goodness to 1 hour a week. And children aren't taught that way. Children are taught by the example of the parents in the home. That's how children are taught. Children don't learn through the brain, they absorb through their consciousness. Children know whether parents quarrel at home or whether they're friendly. Children know whether there's integrity in the home or whether there isn't. And they take on that integrity or non-integrity by absorption. And so it is, you can't teach a child that by telling it that God is present where you are. But you could take a child, and every morning when it awakens, you could say, now let's close the eyes for 1 minute and just realize God is right here in the bed with us, right where we are. And before that child sits down to eat, you could start with it and now let us say thanks for this meal because God set this table for us. And you could teach that child that it must never go outside of a door without stopping to close its eyes for a second and thank God, God is on the other side of the door too. You can teach a child never to go into a classroom without realizing God is in this classroom. You could teach a child never to start playing without realizing God is on this playground, or God is in the very heart of every individual, every person here, every child here, every teacher here. A parent can do that. Sunday school can't do it. because it has to be done at the time when the child is rushing pell-mell without thought. And so it is. It has to be taught at mealtime. It has to be taught at bedtime. Let us not go to sleep until we thank God for being with us all night as he was with us all day. Nobody can do that but the parent. So it is that if the infinite way is good enough for a parent to follow, it must be good enough for them to impart to their children not merely as knowledge but living. On the other hand, if they have a child that they love enough, it must be worthwhile to go to some trouble to give it the best spiritual teaching they can find for it, whatever one that may be at any given time. And so as far as I'm concerned at this moment, the responsibility for teaching lies with the parents, since I know, just like I know that class teaching is no good in and of itself. Just a week of these hours is of very little value. It's what you do with it that makes it of value. So it is with the children. But I do say that parents will need some guidance in the how and so forth, and that I can't give because I'm not that good with children. But there are students of ours who have been very successful, and it won't be long until we'll have some tapes and some articles and things like that to help parents with their children. But I am afraid that no infinite way teaching will ever take the place of a parent. Now, why didn't somebody tell me? It's almost breakfast time. Or midnight lunch, anyhow. Well, you know, really and truly, last night we said there wasn't anything more, but tonight I'm convinced that must be so. This must be the class. So maybe tomorrow night we'll just... Can we play marbles or tiddlywinks? Thank you.